My name is Beverly Baker and I have the privilege of being the chair of the Older Women's Network, and we are today hosting this seminar entitled Why Driving on the Roads is Not Enough. It's looking at a range of issues involving feminism. We're also today launching the Edna Ryan Awards, which have been very, very gratefully received and asked by us if we would take over the organising and the managing of those. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that wherever we are today, we are meeting on the land of Aboriginal people. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land, land that is never ceded. I offer my respects to elders past, present, and those amazing young ones who are emerging through to take the reins of this enormously ancient civilization and culture. Having said that, that is me done. I would now like to hand over to our New South Wales Ambassador, Carolyn Bohm, for her to host the seminar and introduce you to our valued guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I just want to add to Bev's acknowledgement of country and say that the Older Women's Network supports the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And of course, we need these awards more than ever. Anyone who's been paying attention to the headlines would see that whether it's about equal pay, domestic violence, women facing poverty, equal representation on corporate boards and in Parliament, not to mention a certain recent expose of the way female staffers are treated by those in power. And speaking of power, this event is also held in memory of the late Susan Ryan, who received an Edna Award in 2004 and who was very much part of the Edna sisterhood. In fact, Susan Ryan said of her mentor, Edna, that she was the most inspiring and admirable woman she had ever known. So with that in mind, today we have put together a panel of 4 remarkable speakers with very different approaches to the question of why we still need to make a feminist difference. And I would particularly like to thank Yumi Lee and her team at OWN for putting this panel together. Lyndall Ryan is a distinguished academic and feminist historian who has taught women's studies and Australian studies at several Australian universities, including Griffith University, Flinders, and Newcastle. She also happens to be the daughter of Edna Ryan. She was awarded an Order of Australia in 2019 for her significant service to higher education, Indigenous history, and women's studies. Natalie Lange is a branch secretary of the Australian Services Union in New South Wales and the ACT. She's worked with members of the water, transport, airlines, IT, and disability services industries for 10 years. Barbara O'Neill is a Dungati Aboriginal woman who is also a trauma recovery practitioner at the Junction Neighbourhood Centre in Maroubra. She's currently completing a postgraduate diploma in counselling at the Australian College of Applied Psychology. And Saba Vasefi is an award-winning Iranian refugee, journalist, poet, and filmmaker who writes about displaced women in detention and is researching her PhD in feminist cinema studies at Macquarie University. So welcome to you all. Lyndall, I think we should start with you to give us a little bit of a kind of historical context, particularly for people who may not have been familiar with Edna and her life. So can you tell us a little bit about her as an activist in the labour movement?
Yes, Edna was a great believer in the trade union movement. She was born at the beginning of the 20th century, I think on the day that the arbitration court was first established. And she was always very anxious in supporting equal pay for women, and which didn't really come in her lifetime until she was well into her 70s, and she gained national prominence in the national wage case of 1974, where she presented the kind of evidence that the Arbitration Commission was looking for. And workers were just as likely to be supporting dependents as men were. I mean, the big argument that had been against equal pay for the previous 50 years, that men were the breadwinners, they looked after their wives and children, and that if women were in the workforce, it was really only for pin money. Well, Edna had known all her life that this was not the case. Her own mother had gone to work to support a large family of children, and that women were just as likely to be the breadwinner as men. So making that case in a way that the Arbitration Commission understood was the big breakthrough to ensure that women and men had the same minimum wage as each other, whereas until then, women had always had a lower minimum wage. Of course, the wages were fragmented into very different kinds, like you had a minimum wage at the beginning, and then you got a margin for skill, and then you got money if you were working overtime, and so on and so forth. But Edna worked for nearly all of her life to ensure that women started off at the same basic rate as men. We look on it now and can't believe that this has not been the case forever, but let me tell you, it's quite new.
Another thing that she was very active in fighting for was maternity leave, wasn't it?
Yes, that was, she certainly was. She wanted to ensure that women would not lose out if they took maternity leave. That came in a bit later. I think her real concern was to start off at the same minimum wage rate for men. I think it was the union movement, having got that fillip about the minimum wage, then moved into other areas like the minimum wage and what we maternity leave, and now what we call family leave and parental leave. So that's all been equalised out now, and a very important breakthrough.
And I was interested to read about her, Lyndall, that before she joined the Labour Party, she was in fact a communist. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Yes, she joined the Communist Party in the 1920s as a young woman, partly because she felt it was the only party that took women's issues seriously, and that gave her a role in policy making and the right to speak. She wrote articles for the Communist Party newspaper. She worked in the Communist Party office and was able to read all the correspondence between the Central Committee in Sydney and what was happening over in Moscow. So she felt right in the middle of it. And it also gave her an enormous opportunity to read. She had to leave school to support her ailing mother before she could complete high school. And so the Communist Party opened up a whole realm of new possibilities for her. But her membership didn't last all that long because it was there were new policies coming in from Moscow, and she just fell foul of all of that. So she found herself expelled from the party because she was allegedly seen talking to a Trotskyist on a tram. We laugh about it now, but it was taken very seriously at the time. But there was a long gap before she joined the Labour Party. I think she saw herself for a decade as a revolutionary without a party. And eventually, when she did join the Labour Party in the mid-1940s, she had gone in with a purpose. She wanted to become a member of Parliament, and she was part of a small cluster of women Labour members who were seeking pre-selection, largely in an unwinnable seats, but sort of testing out their possibilities. And she's got pre-selection for a very safe Liberal seat on the North Shore, but she did dramatically increase the vote. There were quite a lot of women in that electorate who were quite prepared to vote for Edna. So that was great. But in the end, she ended up in local government in the outer western suburbs of Sydney and had nearly a decade in local government. So she was somebody who had a lot of experience. She learned about strategies. She learned which issues were worth supporting, and others which, although she believed in them, you weren't going to get anywhere. So by the time Susan Ryan became a senator for the ACT and then a minister in the Hawke government, she was able to give Susan a lot of very sound advice about how to promote particular policies and when to compromise, when to accept amendments to legislation coming up in the parliament, and when to pull back. So I think Edna and Susan, who got on like a house on fire, I think that Edna saw Susan as the daughter who really went into politics to achieve something. So there was a very strong bond between both of them.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that she may have thought of Susan as, you know, the daughter who went into politics, but
Yes.
I want to know what it was like for you growing up with Edna as a mother who was obviously out campaigning and attending meetings all the time. Did she bring all of this stuff home? And did you, in any sense, rebel against that initially? Or what's your trajectory been?
No, we didn't rebel. And yes, talking politics around the tea table every night, as Eva Cox will probably also attest to. We had a very lively political upbringing. There was nothing to rebel against. My mother always ensured that the dinner was on the table. She was a good plain cook. She always ensured that the house was, she was a great believer in a tidy house because, as she said, you could get things done then. I belong to the generation that rebelled against housework, I will say that, and she was shocked that the women's liberation movement didn't promote housework, because she believed if you've got a tidy house, you can get things done. If you had an untidy house, you were spending all day looking for things that you didn't know what you'd done with. So she saw it as a waste of time to be rebelling in the way that I did as a member of women's liberation. But in terms of politics, you could not have got better training in the political system than from my mother, Edna Ryan. She knew every aspect of it. She knew the names of every politician in state and federal parliament. She understood how local government worked. It was far better than studying politics at university, let me tell you. She was streets ahead. She understood what you should really focus on. And I think that's where Susan Ryan learned so much from Edna.
And finally, I just wanted to ask you about how she used the women's electoral lobby as a platform.
Well, Edna adored women's electoral lobby. It had been the sort of the political outfit that she'd been waiting for all her life. You know, issues like childcare, equal pay, maternity leave, access to abortion. These were the very issues that she had been critically promoting all of her life. Now here was a women's organisation that made these issues central to their platform. And so she just adored working with all of these women who were largely many decades younger than her, but had an energy that she loved and built on. And with them, she was able to write a book about the history of women's wages in Australia. It had never been done before. But she had a couple of younger women who are happy to go out and do a lot more research and do some drafts, which Edna was able to build on. So she saw the arrival of the women's movement in the 1970s as a great period of flowering for her. All of her pent-up energy and beliefs came to life in a very important way.
What a fabulous portrait you've just painted for us. Thank you so much, Lyndall. You've really brought her kind of energy and commitment to life. Natalie, if I can turn to you, I think that you've just come from a meeting with a fairly positive outcome that you might like to share with us.
Yeah, oh, thanks, Carolyn. If I can start just by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'm calling in from our office in Redfern. So I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and importantly, emerging. We've had an event this morning that was to launch a guide that had been developed by ASU members who are frontline practitioners to assist all workplaces to be able to identify what are the worrying signs that indicate perhaps a worker is experiencing family violence while working from home, and what are the measures that can be put in place to support those women. And this is all part of our practical supports, as well as the campaign for universal access to paid family violence leave, which we've been campaigning for since 2015. And if I can just very quickly, please acknowledge the important work of Ludo McFerrin and the women at the Domestic Violence Clearinghouse who pioneered paid family violence leave back in 2010. And yes, today we had over 300 participants in that discussion, which is, a really inspiring force for change when you've got 300 women who go back to their workplaces, whether that's a traditional workplace or working from home, but are able to speak to their colleagues and be part of addressing family violence. And we had the New South Wales Attorney General, Mark Speakman, attend today. He was part of the launch and actually launched the resource, and talked about the New South Wales government's experience of having paid family violence leave for all their workers, which is one of the important victories that we've had so far in this campaign, and saying that actually what they have seen is it is very little cost for a very huge benefit. It's a huge benefit for the women who need to be able to access that leave entitlement, but also in terms of sending a very strong community message that we don't accept family violence. So really great progress to be seeing actually activists bringing along with us both sides of politics to important matters that are going to support women workers.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations. But I gather that from the conversation we had the other day that your members have found COVID has, created a lot of stress issues for them and put a lot of them at risk to deliver services to the community, including the NDIS. And it's all very well that, we have these movements to clap them and call them heroes, but they're still not getting proper wages. So, given the sort of all the factors that came together during the pandemic, what will it take for your members to get a decent pay rise? I know that you were campaigning for a pay rise of an additional $4.90, I think, an hour as a COVID care allowance, and that got rejected.
It did. I think we all need to just really be critical of the systems that we have in place. The Fair Work Commission has failed there to award justice, and that's because they're bound by an act, and the Fair Work Act isn't about saying, well, what are right and just outcomes for equality, for the value of workers, for the value of women, and so they only make decisions within the confines of the act that they can do. And that means in this circumstance where we've got workers who are turning up and supporting people with disability who have suspected or confirmed cases of COVID and doing a really great job, because people with disability should expect to have reliable workers turning up and doing a great job, that those workers sought an extra $4.90 an hour, so a very small amount, because of the heightened skill that's required in performing work when you're supporting a person with a suspected or confirmed case of COVID. They asked for $4.90 and they were rejected, despite the fact that the Fair Work Commission actually recognised, yes, the work is more intense, the work is more valuable, it does have a significant impact on the workers, on their health and their well-being, but they found that no, it's really up to an enterprise level or a question of government funding. And I think that's really appalling that simply a government can put their hands in their pocket and say, oh no, we're not going to make the funding available, so therefore we don't get justice and women don't get recognised and paid for the important work that they do.
Absolutely. I should just point out to everybody who's watching and listening and joined us today that we do have a chat forum running, and you're very welcome to post any comments. If we can get to questions at the end, we will, but we've got a lot to get through this afternoon. However, we will archive all the comments and we will use them for future events. So please do feel free to join in the conversation in the chat function. Natalie, back to what you were just saying, do you think that part of the problem in getting these gains for your members is that you get told so often you don't produce anything?
That's right. And we were able to demonstrate that our members who work in community and disability services were undervalued on the basis of gender when we ran our successful equal pay case. Today is the 25th of November, On the 1st of December, our members receive their final instalment of their equal pay increases and will now be paid between $200 and $650 more per week in being awarded pay equity. It's fantastic. Like it's a wonderful victory and we should celebrate it. It's also really makes my blood boil that we've had to wait this long to actually realise equity when, you know, in 2012 it was recognised you don't have pay equity and you should have it. So, you know, we have to keep campaigning and saying, well, we deserve more. And this idea that you don't produce anything in service-related industries is really offensive. And to go to your point, Caroline, about, you know, people are happy to clap and say, oh, well done, nurses, and well done, community and disability workers, you're heroes. They are heroes. And I think it's great that, you know, everyday people want to applaud them, because actually everyday people recognise they do deserve to be paid more, but the claps don't pay the bills. And they don't actually value a worker. And so, you know, we're just not going to accept rounds of applause anymore. I think it's you know, who got us through COVID? It was women. Yet why is the result of COVID what's being deemed a pink recession? It is. The outcome of this recession disproportionately impacts on women. Yet the workforces that got us through this crisis are supermarket workers, you know, rationing toilet paper, where we saw some of the worst, you know, human behaviour being played out in the supermarket aisles. It is nurses, it's community workers, it's disability workers, it's our teachers, it's childcare workers, it's cleaners. But it's female-dominated industries that have got us through. And right when we've got this moment of spotlight on the importance and the value of these female-dominated workforces, we say we should be paid more. And we get told no job is better, any job is better than no job. What, are you crazy? It's a recession. How could you possibly ask to be paid more in the middle of a recession? Yet what we know, because history has shown us time and time again, that we get through this crisis because of women. And then we will be told when times are good economically, that we deserve a pay rise, we'll be told, oh, you don't produce anything, your work's not that valuable. And we're just not going to stand for that.
So obviously it's about changing the narrative. And I think that you've got something in the pipeline that's coming up very soon. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, the community and disability sector is actually the fastest growing workforce in Australia. Yet our politicians want to talk about we need to create jobs, and they want to stand in front of a factory, or they want to stand in front of a mine, and they want to cut a ribbon, and they want to put a high vis on and their hard hat and stand there with their shovel and say that's how they're creating jobs. Well, the way that they can actually create jobs in every single regional community is to value community workers and disability workers and make social assistance jobs really good, decent work. So we are continuing our campaign. We've won equal pay, but now we're fighting for entitlements. We're fighting for the long service leave that workers in the sector often forego because of government funding. We're fighting for training, supervision, career paths. We're fighting for better pay and more secure jobs. And what we're talking about is the fact that we're worth it. We're not saying, you know, oh, please, sir, may I have some more? Our members do this work because they love it and they are committed. That's not an invite to them be exploited for that commitment. That commitment is why they're bloody good at their work and they're really valuable workers and they deserve to be paid properly. And so that's why we're fighting for those entitlements, because we're worth it.
So I think you're going to be launching this slogan, because we're worth it, tomorrow. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. So our members are coming together in their conference. They've actually spent years developing their, for want of a better term, claim. And I'm sure, right now, Edna Ryan is going, yes, that's what I did. I had my claim and we all signed up to the claim and we went and served it on our employer. Our members, in forming their claim, have actually been organising, and they've been building local delegate committees and activist structures, so the infrastructure to win. And tomorrow, delegate leaders from all of the industries that the ASU cover are coming together, and our community and disability sector members are going to be finalising the launch for this campaign, because we're worth it, because we are.
You are. And it's great to know, actually, from talking to you last week, that one of the good things, one of the signs of optimism, I think, is also that more and more women are joining the union.
Yeah, this is fantastic. You know, if you say, well, what's the average union member look like? It's a 50-something-year-old nurse, statistically. It's women working in service industries who often hold qualifications. And our members in the community and disability sector are amazing frontline workers who are joining their union in droves. And our union since 2015 has had a net growth of over 30%. So if you pick up a paper, it may not even have to be a Murdoch paper, but if you pick up a paper, it's probably going to tell you that the union movement is in decline or that we're not relevant. Oh, that's rubbish. The sisters, we're not having that. We're growing our unions. We're feminist unionists, and feminist unionists are winning and growing and building our activist might every single day.
Thank you, Natalie, so much. You really, you've kind of really furthered the tradition of Edna with what you've just said. So thank you very much for your contribution today.
Thanks, Carol. And if I can note, Edna Ryan was a proud ASU member. She was a member of our sister branch, the United Services Union. And so we hold Edna in the highest of regards. Of course, Christina Ryan, Edna's niece, was one of our champions of equal pay when we won equal pay. And so I really want to acknowledge the entire Ryan family and the contribution that they make and continue to play as part of the ASU family.
Well, and I'm sure you're going to have some great nominations for the Ednas next year.
Always, with pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara, I'd like to come to you now. You got your feminism, you were telling me when we spoke on the phone, from your gran and your aunties, and you learnt very early on, I think you said to me, never to play the male game, and you've taken what you learnt at uni to help women on housing estates and really helping women to expect more. And I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about the Gathering the Dots program and how that helps women to understand that they are entitled to expect more.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you. Gathering the Dots program really came from when I attended Southern Cross University as my Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge. And I thought, why did I have to come to university to learn a lot of this? Why didn't I know this? I intuitively knew it, but as what would have been deemed as probably an uneducated person, there was no way I had a voice, or I couldn't present what my background, my matriarchal background, had given me a lot of insight. But it was transferring that into my rights and my voice. It only happened from university and from critical thinking. So I'm one of Natalie's mob. I'm a community worker at the Junction Neighbourhood Centre at Maroubra. We go in a very social justice direction, and I'm very much a feminist when it comes to working with the women across the housing estates. And I also tie into Lyndall because one of the biggest influences on my life was a woman named Anne Duffy, who was a communist around about the same time as Edna. So Anne Duffy turned around to me and she said, do something with your strength, girl. Go and get educated and bring it back to women. So that was really, so they both tie in really well. Gathering the Dots is a trauma-informed program, and it assumes that the women that come through the program have experienced trauma or are carrying transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. That is a given. So everything is written around that assumption. So women, first of all, we talk about the value of community, and that community doesn't have to necessarily be your family. It can be whoever. Then we talk about, we discuss the structures of poverty. And I think that's really important because without the knowledge of the structures of poverty, there's no reference point. People often think they've had a hopeless grandparents, hopeless family. Why didn't they do something with the money they earned? They don't understand that with poverty, there is no money to be saved. There is no money to be worked with. So, and then I talk to them about Sydney especially has always the life in Sydney has always been about recession and how you survive it and where you end up in Sydney. So we also discussed, my program's Aboriginal, right? But we also discussed the poorhouses that were existing in Sydney and how non-Aboriginal women also have very strong structures of poverty holding them back. And then we go into, well, you know, why are you here? And then we discuss employment and going into business. And I say to a woman said to me once, she said, I want to be the Prime Minister, because Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister at the time. And the whole room started laughing. But instead I went to the whiteboard and said, okay, then you want to be Prime Minister? Here's where you are and here's how you get there. And it was really simple. Well, we know it's not simple to be Prime Minister, but it was really simple steps to be able to get to a political environment, then go from there. So that's what we do, is we then bring in people from university and from TAFE, and they talk about the access to education, and anyone can access it that wants to. Then we talk about how there needs to be a bridge. If you want to access the economy as an Aboriginal person, you need to build your own bridge towards white ways of being. So you can preserve who you are culturally, but you are going to have to understand the white ways, because you're not going to, it's a white dominated society, and capitalism is a Western construct. So we discuss all of that. I had a woman, she was 36, about 5 children. She was shocked. She thought that employment was handed down through families, that you were born into the right to have a job. She had no idea that you could just get one. When I dug deeper, she said that that she had been for jobs as a younger woman and just been laughed out of the room, out of the office, or wherever it was she went for the jobs. Then I dug deeper in the room, and the women that tended to be darker skinned, some of them had great qualifications, but they had never, ever, ever been employed, ever. Yet they had all of the drive and fire to have a job. So when the women without those qualifications saw them, they said, well, why would I bother? Mm. And that is what we're up against. Mm. And that's where the feminism comes in. Because if we do it from a feminist perspective, if we look at life from a feminist perspective, we realise that being a woman, you are born into disadvantage immediately. You are just lucky if you were born into a family where there is good employment prospects and good education prospects. But being a woman, you are born disadvantaged. And that's how we discuss it. So then we look at women that have actually made it, and we look at their life and how they progressed. Mm. And we know not everyone's going to make it to the top. That's a given. The top for these women is getting a job, walking through a door and sitting down or standing up and saying, at the end of this week, I'm going to have some money. Mm. That is the ceiling at the moment for them. They can't see beyond that. And when Natalie was talking about women in poverty, women just people saying to women, oh, but you've got a job. Be happy you got a job. Well, for Aboriginal women, oh, it's be happy you've got rights. We've given you your rights. Mm. You know, be happy. Mm. And you get heaps of money. You're Aboriginal. You get heaps of money off the government. Why do you want a job? So women, when we do gathering the dots stands for, you see the dot paintings and you see the dots around the circle. That's the mob sitting down and yarning. Imagine some dots missing out of that. Mm. well, we're gathering them back to culture and a sense of belonging. But in this case, it's in the Western world, in a broader perspective, because that is where our people have to go to move forward. There may be a day when there will be enough Aboriginal politicians, there'll be Aboriginal organisations and businesses, and then there'll be decent representation. But whilst we, as women, need to look at belonging to a Western structures and culture, we really need to rely very strongly on our feminism to strengthen us to get there. And luckily, the Aboriginal community is mainly matriarchal.
Can I ask you, Barbara, just briefly, in relation to what you do as a sort of trauma practitioner, to talk a little bit about another really inspiring program that you were telling me about? I think the acronym for that one is YAMS. And I just love the way this kind of helps women to contain the trauma. Can you just explain that to us quite briefly?
Okay, so I'm an Indigenous trauma and recovery practitioner. And one of the things that in my community work that I identified was we would have women like at the old FACS, Department of Community and Justice. There was child removals and what have you. And a lot of the time we have women going to court, to family court, or before a magistrate in criminal court. And always I found the mother was in the naughty corner. The woman who gave birth to these children, the woman who probably lost everything through DV, the woman was put in the naughty corner and frowned upon by the authorities. So I decided that I would be the one who had the women's back. I would have mum's back, or if she had no children, I would have her back. So what happened was I had a woman, we're on a phone conference with a judge in Wollongong family court, and she couldn't get there, and she had lost custody of her child to the father. And the judge said to me, he said, well, are you willing to work with this woman? I said, yes. He said, okay, I will hold off the proceedings for 3 months while she works with you. And we hung up, and I looked at her and I said, I don't have a program. And I said, I'm going to write one, but you better attend it, right? So I wrote a program with this woman in mind. I put myself in her position. How would I want to be spoken to? And so why it's called YAMS is it's yarning about my stuff. So the woman, we go through, because there's usually children involved, we go through the child's brain and the effect of any sort of stress or violence upon the child's brain. And the chemical difference that makes. When I show the women the actual electro microscope photos of the syntax and what have you, they stop in their tracks. For the first time ever, somebody has shown them adult proof. They're speaking to them as an adult about this is the reaction. And so then we go through all of that and this is what happens to your child. Then I'll sit down. I said, but what about you? How about you? And so we took, for the first time ever, some women say it's the first time anyone's asked them that. Even going through their DV stuff.
And then what you're doing, I'm just going to wrap this up because I'm very aware of time, so I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but you're preventing the women from having to relive the trauma each time by documenting it so that it can be handed to a court official or the police so that each time the woman doesn't have to retell her story.
Yes, okay, so that's from a trauma-informed perspective. I take the details. There could be details everywhere. Then I go away and put them into order. And I tell it as a first story. I say, hi, my name is Barbara, and this is what happened to me. And so then I give it to the woman in a sealed envelope. She may not want to ever read it, but she hands it to her lawyer or her judge or whoever she's working with, and her story's there. She never has to tell it again.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for your contribution today, Barbara. I know that there are going to be some questions which we may not get to, but we'll get an answer to them for the next time, and we'll have you back, I'm sure, because there's so much more to talk about. Saba, if I could come to you now, I just wanted to ask you as someone who came to Australia from a very repressive regime from Iran. Can you tell us a little bit about the examples of courage and dissent that you saw from women in your family? So they may not have been called feminists, but certainly the way members of your family stood up for things, I would certainly call that feminism.
Hello, everyone. Let me to acknowledge the traditional owner of the land that we gather today and thank them for sheltering me and my daughter Minerva. And let me to acknowledge how I'm delighted to be a recipient of Edna Ryan Award and how I'm fascinated from Edna's life to be a revolutionary without parties. I think I am one of them. Without any parties. And yeah, I think I learned feminism from my early childhood, from my grandmother and my mother's family, you know, from inherited, you know, kind of political activism. And when Revolutionary Guard, Islamic Republic of Iran's guards invaded my grandmother's home to confiscated my uncle's staff, and I have a clear vision as a little child when she put her hands and she said, if you're gonna come to this home to invade my son's staff, you have to cross my dead body to get into my house. And all of my male member of family were silent, but she was outspoken, and the guards pushed her away and they confiscated, of course, all of his staff. And after that, so many years after that incident, it has happened to my mom when a Revolutionary Guard tried to confiscate my mom's home for my brother's activism, because he was a photojournalist. And she said, if you're gonna come to my home, you have to cross my dead body. And then again, I could see my other brother and all the male member of family were silent, but my mom was outspoken. And in a contemporary life, I think I'm still inspired by the women who are not a famous activist, or they don't call themselves a feminist. They are not coming from political background, they are not activists, they are not a scholar, they don't have any knowledge about political activism or political science. But in Iran, they are resisting against compulsory hijab. They are resisting against cruelty of Islamic Republic of Iran and their radicalism. And I'm inspired by the women whose son, whose child has been killed by the Islamic regime, and even there is not any official press to represent them, but they try to amplify their own voices. I'm inspired by them. I learned feminism by those outspoken female.
So
empty, you know, just with empty hands.
With empty hands, with bare hands, indeed. And so when you came here, Saba, you arrived, is it 10 years ago? Is that right?
Almost, yeah.
Yes. When you arrived, I'm wondering what your first experience, once you'd kind of processed getting here and the shock of, you know, adjusting to life here and the language issues and everything else, what struck you about Australian feminism?
At the beginning, I was so passionate. I was so enthusiastic for activism. And gradually, step by step, I become more quiet, I think, because of the backlash I received or harassment I received.
So just tell us a little bit about that, because I think when you got here, you'd been dressed in black from head to toe as part of the regime and the requirements of Sharia law, and you fell in love with color. You saw color all around you and you dressed in color and you wore makeup. And I think you told me that there was a backlash from feminists here, that you got criticized.
Yeah, it is not only backlash from feminists. It's because if I want to categorize the reaction of the society from my action, I received 3 different reactions. one reaction totally denied me, ignored me. And I consider ignorance as a form of power.
Mm.
And another reaction was try to eliminate me because they thought I'm not a grateful refugee. I am not meeting the expectation of the stereotypical of the being a refugee or displaced or refugee or exiled or whatever you're gonna call it. Another perspective, another reaction was accepting me and allowing me to have a dialogue with them. I think what shattered or what made me quiet sometimes, it was because I think Australia has a huge table of conversation, but some people think we need to have a competition to have more chairs around this table. Someone thinks we have to distribute these chairs around this table, and someone thinks we need to add more chairs around this table of conversation for diverse, for hybrid voices around this table. And as you know better than me, probably, migration has a different stage. And you are not staying always in a vulnerable situation. Definitely you improve your life. And let me to tell you about the experiences I had that explain to you why I think I have been discouraged in some point of my life. Mm. Because since I start to advocate for displaced women's life, I experience, when I start to criticize some refugee organization for lack of diversity in their employment or in their board members, they try to eliminate me. They try to call me horrible person to deal with. And they just advise other organizations to eliminate me as much as they can as a solution. This level of censorship is exactly what Islamic Republic of Iran is doing. They are censoring people instead of listening to them or taking them to consideration. And another one was not censoring in that sense, by pasteurizing the story. As soon as I start to write in the media, I realize when the refugee from detention center start to criticize some particular people who advocate for them, and the media start to censor them, to pasteurize the story because they think they are lefties, they are in their side, they shouldn't be criticized. But tokenism is a serious issue in Australia. I think having someone like me or someone successful as a metaphor of the whole of population is another form of discrimination. This is, elimination of refugees. It was another experience I had. And another organization, for example, they use my name, they use my story to get more funding. They claim that because of their support, I flourish. Mm-hmm. without my knowledge, which was so interesting that, I think it's very ironically, I have no comment about that organization. And another organization, I think when I start to organize several events to advocate for social justice, and I organize diaspora symposium, and I try to give award to a refugee who is outspoken and beautifully writing from detention center, and I rewarded Behruz Bouchani for first time in diaspora symposium. The level of harassment I received was another ironic event in my life in Australia. And while people was following my structure, they tried to eliminate me and harassing me. And another example, if I want to give you, was when I was writing in the media, my white colleagues, they thought they can use my work without acknowledging my name. These days, people say, what do you want more from Australia? You're writing in mainstream media. But let me to tell you about the behind the scene. There is some incident that they use my work without my name. which is not happening to white people. I don't think so. And the other things, for example, another journalist, she conducted interview and then she came back to me for mainstream media. Can you get consent of publication from this refugee? If you cannot, journalism is about communication. If you cannot build a trust to get consent of publication, there is something wrong in this system. Mm-hmm. All of these experiences shattered all my passion and my enthusiasm and my trust.
Well, I don't think they've completely shattered them, Saba. In fact, I think you're throwing out a very bold challenge to us today in raising these issues. And I think that in the spirit of Edna Ryan, we see that in fact you are far from being silenced. So I want to thank you for your contribution today and thank all of the panelists today. Before I come to Eva Cox, it's my great pleasure to welcome Eva to this gathering as one of the towering figures of Australian feminism. She's been instrumental in the creation of the Ednas and in making sure that they carry on. So Eva, over to you.
Well, I started life as a refugee from Hitler at a very early age, and I think I was very stirred up as a young child about trying to fix it. Why was I a refugee? Because I was Jewish and was born in Vienna just when Hitler marched in. So I started with the idea that I really did want to make some changes in the world. And I just think one of the things, at the age of 12, 13, I wanted to join the Girl Guides and somehow or other found my way to Edna Ryan's. So on Friday nights, as Lyndall said, we used to sit down. I went to Girl Guides with Julia, her older sister, and I sat there and listened to the politics and went to an ALP picnic and various things. And it gave me a sense that here was some way of starting to get into the political stuff. So when the women's movement reappeared in the 70s or in the end of the 60s and into the 70s, I became very much involved with WELL. And we did some fantastic things. And listening today, obviously a lot of this is going on. All of the stories here, most of this has come up through the Ednas. Because when Edna died, and I used to see her regularly, she lived down the road from me in Glebe when she was still in Sydney. And before when she moved to Canberra, I'd get these phone calls. Eva, what are you going to do about XYZ? Or I'd get an email or something of that sort, or a letter demanding I did something. And I thought we need a system that's going to actually not demand of people could happen. That's needed too, and we still need that. But was going to actually recognise and work out and reward the people that were prepared to be the stirrers and the change agents and make a serious feminist difference. And a few of us got together and started talking about the Ednas, and I was still a member of WELL at that stage. And so we took them to WELL, and WELL decided to run them, and they ran them for quite a few years until there was a bit of a drama about what sort of thing they wanted to make it a bit more upmarket. We didn't want it to be that. We wanted to stay at the community level. They stopped doing them and we sort of picked them up. And I mean, Lyndall was there, part of that too, and Julia and various other people. So there were people that had been part of it, and we ran them until 2018, I think was our last one. So we had 20 odd of them. And I became aware of the fact it was really difficult now to keep something going because the number of volunteers that stayed around and kept around when we were an unincorporated organisation, we didn't have any sort of office or backup. It was fairly difficult. People came, stayed for a year, and just when they got really to understand how to run the event, they disappeared. We had the ASU backing us, and that was always incredibly useful. So I'm delighted that Natalie was here today. But we still need something. We desperately need it because there's not really much recognition in the sense of the feminist stuff. The feminism has sort of lost its focus at a time when we desperately, and I'm going to put a plug in here, we need to fix it. What's really coming through very clearly is the blokes have made a total stuff up of things recently. They've taken on neoliberalism, which is a totally masculinized economics and a very masculinized discipline. And somewhere along the line, the sort of the feminist voice about the social, the relational, the emotional, the political has disappeared. So we wanted to make sure that the Ednas continued at least a small amount of recognition that we could give to people who've done things and to promote the idea that things remain to be done. Other sorts of things I'm trying to do in other areas. And we were trying to think of how we could get this done. And I thought we need an organization. We need somebody to back us. We need somebody to take it over that's got the institutional base, got the membership base, that they can actually make sure that this continues, that we don't fall apart because a whole lot of people suddenly decide that they want to resign. And I talked to Bev about it because I knew Bev from various other political activities. And we got together and we put it together. And I think it's really important that we do have the Edna Ryans keep going. And so I'm connecting up what people are saying. The audience here is listening to a whole set of stories about what people are still doing, and the ASU is doing a terrific job, and all of the other groups are doing a terrific job. The recognition is really important. The event of bringing people together and allowing them to talk about things the way we've talked about things today, that inspires other people to keep trying. Too many people I know are pessimists now. We were optimists in the 70s, and I want to get optimism back on the agenda. We can make changes. We need to make changes. And I want to throw in the idea that we need to make serious changes to what's going on. So far, we've tended to set up our reforms in terms of equality with men on male terms. And look what they've done. They've stuffed up very solidly, because if you only count anything to do with money as the only thing that matters, you're going to stuff the society up. You're going to devalue the social, the relational, the ethical, all of those things that have been discussed today, diversity, Indigenous issues. And I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous people because they have an awful lot to teach us. I'm on Gadigal land also, along with other people, and I just think we just need to do this. I've worked quite a lot with Indigenous issues over the last few months, and they are being incredibly badly treated. So I suppose this is a call to arms in a non-violent sense, in a non-masculinized sense, to say we need the support of people. We need to have lots of people nominated, but we need to give people the energy and the courage to actually go out there and do things and take over leadership, not on male terms. We have a lot of pushes to get women into senior positions. Unfortunately, we did it very nicely, I must say, in the 1970s and into the 80s. We snuck into the public service and all sorts of areas, but after that, they got a bit smart of us, and now they try and avoid appointing people with a feminist background into serious jobs. So I think we don't just need to get women into positions, but we need to change, really start creating change, because we are having a mess. You only have to look at what COVID has done. But COVID's given people a sense of optimism, because it actually, for a very brief period, showed that government and the community together could beat something that like the COVID thing and create a better society. We're now slipping backwards. The budget slipped us off the agenda because they sort of didn't take up women's jobs and said, you know, we could share driving on roads, which is why the title came up there. And that was our share of what there was. We need to get back to the fact that we need to fund the public sector. We need to stop privatisation of things like childcare and aged care and hand it back to the community. We need to really shift the agenda broadly, and we're not doing enough of it. So I've come along today to say, yes, we still need the Edna Ryans and need them very much so. If Edna's not ringing us up, we need somebody else to ring us up. The Edna's is one of the indicators, but we need to actually get together and try and get back to the second wave and all the things we didn't do then, because we need to change society, because a lot of the things that are still a problem, including a lot of the stuff with Indigenous stuff and so on, has been a problem for 20 to 30 years since we took up the neoliberal crap, which made us all self-interested individuals. And I just think we've got to get back to citizenship. We've got to get back to the idea that community counts, and we've got to get equity back on the agenda, not equality with men on their terms. So I'm here to say we're launching the Ednas. The web page is up. Have a good look at it. They're going to sort of flash up the link. Take part in it, join in, and we will keep the revolution going, and we're going to actually do better.
Thank you encouraging our optimism and for reminding us that we need to be stirrers and we need to be troublemakers, and there's a lot to fight for and there's a lot to do. The website is ednaryan.net.au. Nominate a woman before the 1st of June. Saba was a very worthy winner, but there are so many other women that I'm sure you know. Make it a really fabulous list of women and let's move forward together. Thank you all so much for being here today.